Welcome to B-Flow Sessions, the podcast where we help you find your flow on the water and in life. I'm your host, Brad Burden. Join me for conversations with the athletes, adventurers, and paddlers who are all seeking the flow. B-Flow Sessions is proudly sponsored by Pucon Kayak Retreat. Experience world-class whitewater, expert instruction, and the adventure of a lifetime in Pucon, Chile. Save 10% on your trip with the promo code BFLOW10. We are also proudly sponsored by Dagger Kayaks. Team-tested, paddler-proven designs for every river and every paddler. And thanks to our partners, Sawyer Paddles, Stohlquist, and Level 6 for keeping us in the flow. Welcome to the next episode of B-Flow Sessions, and in this episode, we are privileged and honored to be joined by a legend in our sport. Ladies and gentlemen, Charlie Walbridge. Charlie, welcome to B-Flow Sessions.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, it's a privilege. I've met you long time ago, but I had an opportunity to sit down with you and got a copy of your book that we're going to hear about. I got a copy of it signed by you, and again, a legend in our sport. I mean, he literally wrote a book on whitewater safety and whitewater rescue, and then he wrote this book about the daring rescues that have been in whitewater throughout its history. But Charlie's one of the founding fathers of whitewater and has a lot of first ascents to his name. And
my goodness, you can't. I when I came on, there were people who've been doing it for a long time, and who my people of my era built on. People like John Berry, Dick Bridge, Randy Carter, and that's just in mid-states.
Yeah. Well, tell me, how did you get started in paddling? How did it all start for you?
Well, I canoed in summer camp, but I really liked to hike. And I went to college in central Pennsylvania, and compared to New Hampshire, where I went to camp, the hiking was kind of uninteresting. And I founded an outing club at Bucknell with my roommate, and he was a canoe counselor. And in the spring, he talked me into going on a canoe trip down Penn's Creek, which is a Class 2 creek, maybe 40 minutes away from college. And I just thought that was wonderful. It was a beautiful valley. We had lovely weather. And I said, this is incredible. Scenery's fabulous. And I don't have to carry a pack. This is wonderful. Now, of course, we had a few close calls because we really didn't know what we were doing that much. Like, we didn't know what an eddy turn was. We weren't wearing life jackets, but we got down in one piece. It was low water, and we could work our way out of those things, and I just gradually eased into it from there. Some guys in the club got kayaks, and we were trying to learn how to roll from the stick drawings in John Urban's Whitewater Handbook, which was pretty challenging. And we wanted to do a pool session, and we went and talked to the athletic director, who was also the swim coach. And Coach Russell gives us a dirty look and says, I don't want you guys taking those things in my pool. So we went to our faculty advisor, and he said, I think I can talk to him. And Dr. Nicholson went and said, well, Coach Russell, I am currently the chair of a committee called the Place of Sport and University Life, and we're trying to encourage more participation in non-varsity sports. And I think you need to come to our committee and explain your decision. At that point, Coach Russell decided we could have a couple of hours on Sunday morning, and we figured out how to roll. I ended up writing the Penn State Outing Club, and my letter was answered by John Sweet. John Sweet, as some of you guys may know, was the first person to run Sweet's Falls on the Gully.
Right. And
he had a lot of other things that he did. And John said, why don't you come up and attend our pool sessions. So we drove an hour to State College and did the roll sessions. And I'm in a kayak that I'd gotten, and it was too small for me. And Norm Holcomb comes up to me and he says, "You're too big for a kayak. Kayaks are only for women and small, wimpy men. You need a C1." And I happen to have one for sale. Well, I didn't buy Norm's C1, but I bought a C1 from John Berry. His C1 looked pretty rough, actually, and gradually learned how to paddle with it. It was a much easier transition because I was coming from open canoes, mostly aluminum boats.
Sure.
And so transitioning to a C1 felt very similar. And in fact, the first, I'd say, 8 or 10 years I paddled, if you went to a river, C1s would outnumber kayaks 8-1. Because most of us were coming from canoes. It was just an easier move. Of course, back then, everybody had to make their own boats or buy some kind of used pig. And you never knew quite what you were getting with a used boat.
Right. And of course, then, I mean, they were all made of fiberglass or some sort of, like, I guess some of them maybe even
Fiberglass
Kevlar.
and molds. Kevlar came on, probably like 73 or 4. I remember when I first heard about it, there were paddlers who worked at DuPont, and they had this experimental fabric that they were trying to figure out what to do with it. Some of the DuPont guys smuggled some out, and they made some boats. And when it worked, they went back to DuPont and said, "Hey, look at this." But back then it was called PRD 49, for Product Research and Development number 49. And when Kevlar first came out, it was called Kevlar 49 because it had already developed a certain reputation in the paddling world. And of course now it's just Kevlar.
Right. Well, take us through kind of the next evolution then when, getting into the 70s and 80s when you start to branch out and explore and get into some more serious whitewater, and then how you got into working with rescue and things.
Well, whitewater became really the most important thing in my life. I taught school for a year in D.C., and D.C. has an amazing paddling community, met a lot of good people, but I really hated teaching school. So I ended up going back to my grandmother's farm, and back then, a lot of gear was homemade, and just getting the stuff you needed was really hard. Like for a spray skirt, there was one guy in D.C. who ordered neoprene, and I got some from him, and there was another guy in D.C. who I could get shock cord from, and got some wetsuit glue from a dive shop. And I said, what I need to do is put kits together. And back then there were other people doing kits. And so Wildwater Designs kits started. And it was real small, ran for a number of years. And then as the decade ended, things really changed. For one thing, the paddling industry was growing to the point where you didn't have to make your own stuff. But probably equally important was that women were entering the workforce in a much more serious way than they had like 10, 15 years earlier. Like when I went to college, most of the women I talked to, they were just going to work part-time until they got married. And by the end of the 70s, then women were definitely doing the whole career thing, and that meant there was less time to put kits together. Some guy coming home and saying, "Hey, honey, put this together in your spare time." That just wasn't going to fly. And so I ended up running a conventional mail order place. I still made the kits, but they were much less important. And got involved with safety sort of through a back way. I was at a slalom race, Class 2 slalom race, the Icebreaker Slalom in Unadilla, New York. It was in early October, sort of the last hurrah for the racers to get together. And by that time, I was racing pretty seriously, because if you were if you want to be a good whitewater paddler, that's what you did. There were no clinics, there were no kayak schools. But if you went to a race, you would try to handle your boat under very measurable conditions, and the race people were very supportive. You know, what was really amazing is you'd go to a race and you might end up talking about something and getting coaching from somebody who's like one of the top ranked paddlers in the country.
Sure. Let's eddy out and take a quick break. Do you need a break from the cold of a North American winter? Then let's head south to the best whitewater on earth at Pucon Kayak Retreat. Email me at bflowkayak@gmail.com to learn more about how you can take the ultimate paddling adventure in the heart of Chile. Now let's peel out and head downstream.
And I really liked the community there. And you know, I always had dreams of making the team, but I never really broke into the top three. But I was at the icebreaker slalom, and a guy got killed, and that was a total freak out because nobody would expect a death at a Class 2 slalom. And what had happened was he was paddling doubles with a young woman, and they flipped. The woman got out and made her way to shore quickly, but he was standing up in the river and trying to walk his boat back to shore. And he went over a ledge, and there was a rock at the bottom of the ledge, and he trapped his foot. And I was coming down the course, and I see all these people running around and ropes going into the river, and it's like, this is not good. So I hopped out and went running down, and this guy was underwater, and we had no idea what happened and no idea what to do. And, of course, afterwards, you know, people were just, you know, they say, well, that was a freak accident. Well, I didn't even understand what happened, so I talked to a lot of people, and I'm a writer and a storyteller, and so I wrote up the accident, and it turned out that there had been other foot entrapments, one in Tennessee, one over in North Carolina, and eventually this became part of the warnings that we give people. I mean, they always used to warn people, you know, don't stand up, you might sprain your ankle. But now the warnings were a good bit more serious. And having written that report, I got a call, and it was, you know, there weren't that many deaths. The sport was small, and people were really pretty cautious. I got a call from some friends I knew in southern West Virginia that one of the best paddlers in the state had gotten killed on the Gauley. So I wrote up that accident. And doing that got Chuck Tummins, who was the Commodore of ACA, American Canoe Association, asked me to be the safety chair. And that really just, you know, started me down that path.
Okay. And now, I mean, anybody who follows whitewater, is involved in whitewater, they see the American Whitewater Safety Report and Incident Report, and you have a major hand in that, correct?
A major hand in
the American Whitewater Incident Report that, you know, they come out. I'm not sure how often, but I think it's once a year.
I do it twice a year. It's sort of an odd hobby. It was really inspired because as a young man, I was a camp counselor up in the White Mountains, and I started reading the accident reports in the Appalachian Mountain Club Journal, Appalachia, and it really drove home some things, you know, particularly about the importance of keeping your group together and watching the weather and that sort of thing. And so when there was this drowning at Unadilla, I just assumed there'd be some place to send it. Well, there really wasn't. But I sent it to the American Whitewater Journal, and it got published. And then you know, Bob Taylor's death on the Gauley got published. And because of that, people started sending me stuff. not huge amounts of it, but you know, the number gradually grew, and I'm not sure when I really started doing the summaries, because I wrote up individual accident reports, but then there were too many.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you
Right.
couldn't write 5-page reports on 20, 30, and in a typical year, you know, you're talking about 50 accidents, probably 35, 40 in the first half, and 15, 20 in the second half of the year. So, you know, that's how the summary came about, and I got involved with American Whitewater when Pete Skinner, who American Whitewater really got in a bad place. And again, I'm not sure about the year, but it was like the late '80s, where it was not working, because it had been an all volunteer organization. But again, women entered the workplace in huge numbers, and we lost a lot of volunteers, and the organization was just not making it. And Pete Skinner decided that the American Whitewater was not going to die. He went out to California. He got $10,000 from Yvonne Chenard, and he got the magazine. The journal kept being published again, and then we're having a meeting. He had asked me to come on the board, and I was a little bit reluctant because I'd been on the American Canoe Association board, and that was not a fun experience. You know, organizations have very different personalities, and I won't go into that one. But I showed up for an American Whitewater meeting because Pete Skinner had talked me into it, and I remember it was up at the Gauley Festival because AW was taking over the Gauley Festival. It was originally run by a group that called itself Citizens for Gauley River, and I was part of Citizens for Gauley River mostly because I had a mail order business doing outreach and fundraising for them. And when the river was declared a national river, then they said, "Well, we've done our job. We're just going to fold up." And American Whitewater took over the Gauley Fest. So I showed up at the Gauley Fest, and there's a whole bunch of picnic tables pushed together, covered with pizza boxes and beer. And Pete Skinner and Chris Cole are arguing about the journal, but they got stuff done. And Pete really refocused American Whitewater into doing conservation work. He said at one of the meetings, "There are going to be over 300 dams relicensed in the next 5 years, and we ought to be checking every one of them for whitewater, and if there is whitewater, we ought to get some."
I mean, but that approach really worked. I mean, it took 20, 30 years, but I mean, look at all the recreational releases we have now throughout the country, and American Whitewater has been one of the major driving forces behind that.
It's been pretty amazing, and you know, part of it is that there were a lot of good people who came in, and you know, one of them was Tom Christopher up in New England, who is one of the key people behind the Deerfield and also smoothing out the releases on the Kennebec and Penobscot. And I can't even keep track of all the stuff that they've been doing, but it's an organization where you get committed volunteers, and it will multiply the effectiveness, and the volunteers multiply the effectiveness of the organization because they've got a staff of like 8, 10, but somebody like Kevin Coburn is mentoring like maybe 20, 25 individual activists, and probably advising a lot more. That's what all those guys do, and certainly they work hard on some of the big projects. But but really, what they do is empower volunteers. You know, we switched. You know, at some point where we realized that in order to be effective, we had to have a staff. You couldn't do it all volunteers because volunteers have other things going on in their lives. But you keep using the volunteers.
I want to ask you now about something you wrote about, and it's actually something that a friend of mine we were recently debating. Give me a definition, and maybe if you could, an example uh, of like a rapid that people would know. Give me your definition, the Charlie Walbridge definition of the classification system for rapids, 1 through 5, and give me an example in each rapid or river.
Goodness, it's you know it's pretty hard to do that because rivers have so many different characteristics, and it's something that has been argued about extensively. The main thing that I would recommend people do is that they compare rivers to each other. You know, there are people who say, "Oh, the Gauley is really no more than class 4," and then there are outfitters who will say, "Oh, they're class 6s on the Gauley." And I don't care what number you use, but if you think the Gauley is class 5, you need to talk to somebody who's been on the Gauley and has run some of the other rivers before you jump on them. And you know, Leland Davis' book Rivers of North America is really the best place to look because Leland and Andrea have boated rivers all over the country, and he's one of these people that says the Gauley is a 4+. And fine, you run the upper Gauley, and you look at something that he's calling like a 5. Well, you better pay attention because it's all a matter of comparison, and you get people and books that they have their own standard, and it may be different by as much as a full grade. You know, I revised Wildwater, West Virginia back in the late '90s. That was Bob Burrell's book that was one of the things that got me out to West Virginia in the first place. And I looked at his his book as I was revising it, and the classifications were awfully high by modern standards. I changed a few, but mostly it's like the book is internally consistent.
I think
And if
William
you go
Neely
out
said
and you
about Nantahala Falls.
go back to Stanley, he's pretty internally consistent. But if you think a California class 4 is like a West Virginia class 4, you better watch out.
Right. William Neely said about the Nantahala Falls, it used to be a class 4, and now it's a class 3. And he said that the rapid didn't get easier; paddlers just got better.
That's a good piece of it. I worked for NOC in '74, and back then, we had a pretty strong staff, and a lot of them were pretty serious racers. But we very seldom saw somebody we didn't know catching the little eddy right at the top of Nanty Falls. Well, now
Right.
a lot of people catch it, and
Right.
you didn't see people playing and rolling and doing the stuff that you see people now. Skills have really come a long way.
And boat designs too have made it a lot easier for people, especially I feel like in today's boats with the big bow
Yeah,
rocker, it makes it a
I'm the
lot
wrong
easier.
person to talk to because I paddled the same C1 forever. But you certainly saw the evolution.
Sure. Let's talk about river safety now. And you've been writing the report, and so you see the numbers. Has and I think one of the problems is we see the local tuber gets classified as a whitewater incident the same way that some expert paddler off on an expedition. They both get classified as whitewater incidents, correct?
Well, what I'm trying to do is to give a snapshot of what's going on the water, and we don't get all of them. We're not the government. We can't force everybody to send in reports. And not only that, but tubes aren't even considered boats; they're considered swimming aids, and so they don't get reported. But it gives you
Okay.
a sense of what's going on. And when I was working for ACA, we got involved both with Coast Guard and with state agencies, and spent a lot of time educating them about the sport because they didn't realize back in the late 70s, that there was this very, competent, trained people, and the sport itself was no more unreasonable than skiing or rock climbing or biking. In fact, biking is by far the most dangerous of any of those. But I think that what I ended up doing is pulling out and getting more interested in the whole range of accidents, because that's the whole picture. And if you're talking to a river manager, they don't just, a lot of times you say, well, you guys, you're such experts, we don't worry about you, but we have to put in all these restrictive laws to stop other people. And and we had to sort of talk them out of that. The most important thing you can do is to wear a life jacket. And our motto is education, not regulation. The most important piece of equipment that a paddler has is right here.
Their brain.
Yeah. And it's true for all levels of paddling, because sometimes you see very experienced people do something which, if they'd have thought about it a little bit, they probably wouldn't have. It's much rarer, but it happens.
Sure. Well, one of the things we ask all of our guests is to give advice. And so if somebody's starting paddling, what advice would you give to them from a safety standpoint? Like what things of kit should everybody have on the river? But what safety things should a beginner kayaker learn and have with them?
Find some other people who paddle and go paddling with them. Join a club. Go to an outfitter and take a clinic, because I can list all kinds of gear, life jacket, helmet, paddle, but the important thing is that you learn from other people, you paddle with other people. It's not something you do by yourself.
What about for the advanced paddler? If you see all the reports, when you see that class 5 death from an expert professional paddler, what are things that maybe, do you ever see a common thread of things that went wrong?
There's not much of a common thread. The sport has risks. The risks can be managed, but you'll never eliminate them. And, some of the things I read about, it's like, shoot, the only way that this could have been prevented is just not getting on the water in the first place. Some of them are really capricious. Logs and other risks that were hidden that even a very experienced person couldn't see. I remember I was talking to Buffy Bailey after Willie Kern got killed on the Black Canyon, and right. I said, Buffy, this I understand that none of you guys really saw this sieve that he got washed into. It was that well hidden, but you were there, you tried to rescue him, you spent a lot of time there. Is there any kind of thing that you can see, any kind of warning that you can share with people? And she said, nope. She said, I was in the eddy, and if he'd have gone through, I was next. Some things are just hard to spot, and sometimes you just get caught. There was a death on Great Falls where a guy ran the drop, and there's a flake of rock coming out from the Maryland side, and he got pushed into it. A lot of people get pushed into it. They flip, they take nasty swims. He got held underwater and drowned. He's a good boater, really good boater. And you see that sort of thing a lot. That it's a situation where it's not so easy. You can't just say, oh yeah, you should have done this or that. I thought when I started this, sure. Oh yeah, every accident I'm going to find a cause, and once we know that, we won't do it. Nonsense. Some people, it's just capricious.
I want to talk to you now about some of your favorite things in paddling, maybe some of your favorite rivers or favorite trips that you've been on. What would be the Charlie Walbridge, like Mount Rushmore of rivers? What are your favorite rivers of all time?
Well, my favorite river is the Big Sandy in West Virginia, which is just down the hill from my house. And, I like West Virginia not because all the rivers are the most spectacular, because there are wonderful rivers all over the country, but West Virginia has a really long season and a lot of rivers close together. Like from my house, probably, in the summer there are 3 or 4 rivers. In the spring there are a dozen within an hour. And the West has wonderful rivers, but you'll be driving a lot in between them. And, the Southeast is wonderful. And with the releases they're getting, I mean, Southeast is looking better and better. The New England season I love New England. That's where I got my start in the outdoors. But I always tell people that the New England boating season is kind of like life in the Middle Ages. It's ugly, brutish, and short.
That's pretty good. Um, you've seen a lifetime of whitewater. Um, do you think whitewater is in a good place? I know that, like sales may be dropping, but it seems like participation's up. It seems like access is up. Give us like your you can look back over 50 years and kind of just how you see
There
whitewater,
is
how
so
it
much
evolved
more
and how it's doing.
opportunity. I mean, the idea that you can just go into a store, buy all the gear you need, and you're not driving all over town or trying to convince somebody to help you build a boat, and you're not making your gear, you're not and you're not going around like we did in when I was in college using road maps as our guidebooks. Um, there's just a lot of opportunity. I think just generally outdoor sports it's not like it was when I was younger. When I was younger, there were all these young people who wanted to go out. We wanted adventure. We wanted to
Right.
go out and hike and climb and paddle. Well, I think now a lot of young people, they get all the adventure they need from their phones, and it's a huge distraction because, of course, there's so much you can do with with it digitally. But also, I think that it's like a tide, it goes in and out. And at some point, some of the people will say, well, virtual reality is interesting, but there's something about real reality that is really, that is really special and really worth going after. And the other thing, which I realize more and more, because, I'm old enough now that I'm not driving into town looking for trouble on a river. I'm I'm cautious about what I get into, but I realize that when I tell stories about a river, I'm not talking about the river. I'm talking about the people,
Right.
the really neat people that you meet, the variety of people who I never would have met if I hadn't paddled. I really like the paddling community,
Hmm.
and that small group of guys my age, and we get together and we run a handful of things that are in our area. We don't run the stuff we used to, but we still get out on the water, and no matter what level you're at, being on the water with good people, that's as good as it gets.
That's as good as it gets. That's a great line to kind of leave things with. But I finish every interview with this question. I call this final flow, and I want you to imagine the river god comes down and he asks you, Charlie, I can transport you to any river, anywhere in the world, and you get to be with any group of people. And I'm going to even give you back your prime if you want to be. So if you could pick one last time to ever be on the water, but you got to pick your river and pick your crew, where would it be and who would you be with?
Well, back in the '70s, I went down to Tennessee, and there was a great group of people who paddled out of Oak Ridge. Martin Begun, Singley Brothers, Mark Hall, uh, Kenny Cooper, Monty Meals, and we ran a lot of little creeks coming off the plateau in Tennessee. The one that I'll really remember is the Piney. We got on that thing at high water. I think we had about 15 people to start, and I think about 7 finished, because it was fast, and I just remember that crew, those guys. They were really wonderful bunch of people, and I love boating with them, and there was we boated together for a number of years until they just started getting older and weren't coming up to the Savage or the Gully anymore, and I wasn't going down to the plateau because it was just really hard to time the water. But plateau is beautiful, and when the water is there, it's amazing, but it's very flashy. That's, I think if people were asking, that's near the Obed-Emery system, which is better known.
Yeah, beautiful country. So that would be where you'd go if you had one more chance to go, huh?
Yep, either that or get a bunch of my buddies together and run the Upper Yock. I had my last run of the Upper Yock in 2019. I've gone down and rafting a couple of times, but I really enjoyed boating it. Or another trip down the Big Sandy, or a trip down the Gully. But the thing is, I love the lower Gully. The upper Gully is cool and it's really slam bang stuff. But the lower Gully has the biggest waves and the biggest holes and the best scenery. It just doesn't have the hardest rapids. And I spent a lot of time there and getting together. Like this year, I'm calling around, and a guy I used to paddle with in Tennessee is going to come up, and we're going to get in a raft and see if we can stay out of trouble.
Nice. Well, it's great that you're still out there getting after it on the water. And like I said, it was a pleasure to get to talk to you this past fall at the Golly season. And it's been just a joy to have you on B-Flow Sessions. And from the bottom of my heart and from every other paddler, thank you for everything that you've meant to the sport and done for the sport and continue to do, especially with the safety, with the incident report, because that's very meaningful work. It helps people learn from them. So hopefully we can prevent more of them in the future.
Yeah, well, thank you, because, the reason I do it is because other people find it valuable, and other people help me do it. Because if it wasn't for that, I would have given it up a long time ago.
Well, I'm glad you never gave it up, and I'm glad you're still contributing to the sport in such a meaningful way, and keep paddling. You look great, and we hope to see you out there.
You bet. Thanks a lot.
All right. Thanks, Charlie. All right, cool. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of B-Flow Sessions, where we explore how paddlers find their flow on the water and in life. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow the show, leave a rating, or share it with a friend. It truly helps us grow the community. And a huge thank you to Pucon Kayak Retreat for sponsoring today's episode. If you're ready for a world-class Chilean whitewater adventure, email me at bflowkayak@gmail.com and I'll help you get dialed in. Until next time, keep finding your flow.